when I say the name Howard Hughes, what does it bring to mind? What do you know about Howard Hughes?
The Spruce Goose, Jane Russell's bra.
Yes.
Mormon bodyguards, OCD.
The guy was a genius.
Yes.
The guy was a genius and involved with all kind of different businesses. Anything else? TWA, huge in TWA. Had a lot of lawsuits over TWA. In the mid-60s, he got a lot of money out of TWA that he spent in all kind of other things. He was a recluse too, right? Huge recluse. And that's what we're going to talk about today, because what we're going to tell about is a story that you've probably never heard before about Howard Hughes. And it's going to be a wild story. There was all kind of mystery about Howard in the 72 and 73. Huge mystery that was out there. And I'm going to go through that a little bit. In January 72, there was a telephonic interview done between Howard Hughes and 7 noted journalists in Los Angeles. And they said, yeah, it's definitely Howard Hughes. He described himself as very healthy. They described him as, geez, he's really with it, very intelligent, very in tune to what the world is going on right now. Very Howard Hughes-ish is what it was. Shortly after that, Howard Hughes went from the Bahamas to Nicaragua on a little boat, a little ship there, and the captain of the ship said, "My goodness, what is this? He's the 100 pounds, long fingernails, long-haired, derelict is basically what he was in this one. Totally different man than what was described or what he talked about being on the in the telephonic interview." 6 weeks after that, Howard Hughes meets with the president of Nicaragua in the middle of the night, and the president of Nicaragua describes him as a commanding man, very healthy, just a friendly man, a good man to visit with and a good man to talk with. 6 months later, he meets with representatives from Merrill Lynch, and they describe him as, this is a guy in charge of his business, very smart man, very healthy man, very commanding man, nothing like this long-haired, long fingernail guy. 6 weeks after he meets with the Merrill Lynch representatives, he's again in Nicaragua. There's an earthquake in Nicaragua. They put him on an airplane, fly him into Fort Lauderdale, Florida. There's customs agents, there's IRS agents. I mean, the government wanted this guy big time. So they were there to meet him, and they go on the airplane, and here's this long-haired, long fingernail guy again, laying in the back of the airplane, who couldn't even say his name. And the representatives there said, the books say they took pity on him. I don't know if the government ever takes pity on anybody. But they took pity on him and they said, go ahead and take him to England. So now he's in England. He meets with the governor of Nevada. Governor of Nevada says, what is going on here? I don't know what is really the real story. Meets with the governor of Nevada, middle of the night. And he says, this guy's in charge of his business. He's friendly, he's commanding, you know, he's a real cool guy. He flies airplanes in June of 73. Flies airplanes in England 3 times. And I don't mean fly in an airplane. I mean commanding an airplane, doing touch and goes, doing landings. He's flying an airplane. The person with him, the command pilot at that point in time, a guy named Tony Blackman, and he said, this is a guy I'd like to have as a friend. You know, very, very healthy man, I'd like to have as a friend. 3 weeks after the flight, Howard Hughes falls in a hotel in London. The doctors come in and say, oh my God, what is this? We're back to the 90-pound guy with the long fingernails, the long hair. Totally out of it. His skin was poking through his bones are poking through his skin. They declared him at this point mentally incompetent. And so what we begin to get here is a picture of 2 men. A very definite picture of 2 men, but it's never explained. It's never ever explained what really happened to him until a woman named Eva McLelland comes forward and starts telling a story. Now it begins to come clear. Let's talk about Howard Hughes a little bit. Born in 1905, Only child. Parents died fairly young. Parents died when he was 17 and 19. So his parents died fairly young. The books call him an orphan. But he grew up. His parents fought like cats and dogs. He spent a lot of time with his grandparents, especially his grandparents on his father's side. Really loved his grandmother. And his grandfather on his mother's side owned a ranch, a very large ranch in Irving, Texas, near Irving, Texas. Never graduated from high school. The most education he had was about 8th grade education, but he was smart. This guy was a smart guy. He inherited all of his wealth because of his father's business in oil equipment in 1924. He inherited all of that wealth and had all that wealth in that he used it from there on out. So he got a very rich guy, very smart guy, but a very reclusive guy too. Not a lot known about him. So that's Howard Hughes. We're going to introduce another character into this now, a guy named Vernon Nicely. Vernon Nicely was born in 1921 from Ohio. He did graduate from high school. He had 2 brothers, 1 sister. Smart guy too. Smart guy in school. His dad was a baker in a small town in Ohio. Went into the Army Air Corps in 1942. Was in World War II in the Pacific. World War II ended. He then stayed in the military. He married a woman in 1949. They had 2 children. Moved to Panama in 1957. Moved to Panama in 1957 and was working in Panama from 1957 on. His brother last saw him. I visited with his brother. His brother last saw him in 1960. Lost track of him. I visited with his son. His son last saw him in 1967. Doesn't know what happened to him. Disappeared. This picture, Eva McLelland gave me this ID card of Vernon Nicely. And I asked Eva, I said, Eva, did this look like the man you were married to? And she said, no, that wasn't the man I was married to. I knew not to ask the question, but it wasn't the man I was married to. And the military records of Vernon Nicely says he was 5'11". This gentleman, according to this wall there, is about 6'4" or so. And I asked Vernon Nicely's son, Gary, who I have tremendous respect for, who lives near Washington, D.C., I said, Gary, was this picture your dad? He said, I've never seen that picture before. That's not my dad. So here we have more mystery associated with this whole thing of an ID card saying it's Vernon Nicely, but nobody recognizes the picture on it. Not the family and not the person who he's supposed to be married to. It doesn't there. So we introduce this gentleman now named Vernon Nicely. As I said, 5'11". Eva meets him in Panama in 1969, and even though it says his name's Vernon Nicely, he says, my name's Nik Nicely, 6'4", Nik Nicely, not Vernon Nicely. Okay, that's the second character that we're going to be talking about today. The third one, and very important to this story, is Eva McLelland herself. Eva McLelland was born in 1916, a large family in Alabama, a large family. I think she had 8 other brothers and sisters. Very smart lady, very smart lady. Graduated from high school, married a gentleman who was a career military person in 1942 and had some children. Divorced in 1965. And at that point was working a civil service job in Georgia. And she wanted to do something different. You know, she's divorced, her children are grown, she wanted to do something different. So she hears about this job in Panama that is a civil service job. She says, I want to go try it. So in 1967, she moves to Panama in a civil service position in Panama. Does very well. She's a smart lady. Does very well in the position. September or November of 1969, she sees a very tall, handsome man, 6'4", AIDS all around him, in Panama. First time she's ever seen him. Doesn't think much about it. Sees him again. Doesn't think much about it. And then there becomes an interaction between the two that he actually set up because he wanted to talk to her because she looked like Elizabeth Taylor. Howard Hughes, of course, loved Elizabeth Taylor. In 1949, Howard Hughes asked Elizabeth Taylor's mother, he says, I'll pay you $1 million if you let me marry Elizabeth. And Elizabeth just laughed at him. Of course, nothing ever came of that, but he loved Elizabeth Taylor. Now he's found a woman that looks like her. They begin to interact and visit back and forth. We're now to November. She asked him, she says, when did you come to Panama? Very common question, a person in the military base. When did you come? How long do you have? He said, I've been here 2 months. He didn't say, oh, I got here in 1957. He said, I've been here 2 months. Now we get to December of 1969, and he disappears. He's gone. 2 months. He's gone. December, January 1970, he's gone. Shows back up. During this period of time, Eva says, I feel like I was followed. Okay. Shows back up. They interact again, and he says, she says to him, what have you been doing for the last 2 months? He said, I had some business in the States to attend to. Okay. That's all she asked. She knew when to keep her mouth shut. She knew where the secrets were. She knew when to not probe and when to probe. And at that point, she knew not to worry. Later on, she said, you know, Nik, when you were gone, I felt like I was being followed. And he said, you were being followed. He says, in fact, I've had your whole family checked out. So now he takes her to a jewelry store, actually gets her a diamond ring, a 2-carat diamond ring. Now this is a guy who should have been earning about $9,000 a year, and he was retired. He just retired, earning about $9,000, which he's probably earning $2,000 a year, and he buys her a $5,000 diamond ring. Right after they get engaged, he says, I want you to sign my name. I'm not going to sign my name. Well, will you sign it for me? And so he showed her on the ID card there, what Vernon Nicely's signature should look like. So she practiced it. Signing it. And he would take it to his aides, and they said, she's good enough, let her do it. And she signed the name from there on out. He'd never signed anything. She signed everything from there on out. She said his left hand was burned, by the way, which matches Howard Hughes. So we've got this now situation going on. They get married in May of 1970. No pictures. On the wedding certificate, his name is spelled wrong. He lists no parents, and her age is wrong. Okay, now I compare that to Howard Hughes in 1957. Was married to Jean Peters. At that wedding, Howard used an alias, Jean Peters used an alias, and the judge used an alias. So we're beginning to see a pattern in here of this guy. After they were married, they moved into her apartment, and he would do his business in the middle of the night. He'd get up, do his business in the middle of the night, and go to his apartment that he kept for about 6 months. They'd go to his apartment, and when he'd come back, he placed 2 sawhorses and a door in the bedroom. So when he'd come back from doing his business, he would come back and sleep the rest of the night on that door so he wouldn't wake Eva up. And he kept his business going on through this period of time. It was in November of this year, 1970, that Eva had access to his apartment. And she'd go in there, usually with him, but sometimes just by herself. And she went in there one time by herself, and she says, I knew I shouldn't have done it. I knew I shouldn't have done it. I knew I shouldn't have, but I found a letter. And I read the letter, and the letter was from a lady named Dorothy in Ohio. And it said, I don't want to be married to you anymore. I want a divorce. This is not working out at all, and it's over. So Eva's reading this letter. So Eva naturally, is next time she sees Howard, she sees Nik, she says, Nik, what is this about you being married to another woman? And Nik says, you need to be careful because there's things here that you don't know about that you need to stay out of. And so keep out of my business. Well, Eva said, if you're married to 2 women, this is my business. It is my business. If we look at this, what happened, Jean Peters from Ohio had said, I want a divorce. And at this time in 1970, Howard Hughes and Jean Peters were in their negotiations here of the divorce. And Howard was trying to convince her, oh, I love you, I'll buy you another house. She wasn't buying it. The last interaction they had, the last time they physically saw each other was in 1966. So now for the last 4 years, they've never seen each other. Now she says, I want a divorce. So he's in this mode of a divorce with her at this period of time in the late 70s. So that's just a little episode that's in there with Eva that Eva discovered. Eva did not know who he was. She put the pieces of the puzzle together, bit by bit by bit, little by little by little. She put them all together. And it took her about 3 years to figure this out of who he was. There was one time when she said, I want to call back to my brother in Alabama. And he said, I'll arrange the call for you. Let me arrange the call. And he took her. It was dark. It was about 9 or 9:30 at night, and it was dark out. And he took her into this open area, outside, an open area. And there was a table in the middle of this open area, and there was a phone on the table. And he said, let me place the call for you. And so he placed the call, gave it to Eva. Eva talked to her brother in Alabama for about 15 minutes. And she said, it's the clearest phone conversation I've ever had in my life. I've never had anything that clear before. And she put it down, and she said, Nik, what is this? And he says, oh, it's just a satellite phone. It's a satellite phone. Well, Howard Hughes at this point in time had control of the CIA's communication satellites. So he could use that phone or a satellite phone and connect pretty much with anywhere he wanted, or back with where the stand-in was, wherever the stand-in was located, on the Earth, wherever that might be, to keep the communications back and forth. You remember that phone call that I talked about of 1972, where they're trying to link Howard into the 7 journalists in Los Angeles? They tried to track that phone line, and they could never track it. As with all of his communications, they could never track them. The reason why, he was using the CIA's communication satellites to do his communications with. That's thrown in there too. His physical appearance. He had lightened his hair. His hair was lighter. She said when he took a shower, there would be a smell like potash or something. And she asked him, what are you doing there? What is that? He says, it removes facial hair. And she didn't buy that at all. He's still shaved. He didn't buy that one at all, that it removed facial hair. And one time she said, Nik, what color was your hair when you were younger? And he says, it was black. And she said, that's what I thought, because it's coming in black now. It's coming in darker now. And so he changed his hair. He tried to look Scandinavian. He even took a name that he made up, named Bjorn. My relatives were named Bjorn. Then he made up the name. He also changed his eye color. He changed his eye color because he was French Huguenot background. He changed his eye color to blue. And Eva said his eye, and it took me a long time to figure this one out. Eva said his eyes were a brilliant blue, and they reflected. And it wasn't a contact. They reflected. Your reflection was in it. And so as we trace this back, we think what happened here is that in 1966, Howard Hughes went in, asked to get to Boston for an eye problem, and he got blue irises implanted into his eyes, is what we believe happened there in 1966. Another reason why he would not contact Gene Peters, not see Gene Peters face to face after 1966. That's what we think happened there. Other people, 3 or 4 people have confirmed to me he had brilliant blue eyes. He had brilliant blue eyes. They weren't brown, they were blue, which threw me for a loop a long time. I was researching the eyes in 2005 and discovered that the only place on the earth that you can have an iris transplant that's not experimental iris transplant, is in Panama. That's the only location that you can do it. So how does that fit into it? I don't know. There's still a huge mystery here. But he had his eyes changed to look Scandinavian, and he continued with that. That's another reason why he was harder to identify. Everywhere that they moved, and they moved to a lot of places, the aides were always there. The aides were always close. The aides were always doing business with him, and it was usually at night that they're doing business with him. There was one time she heard a comment that he made, and she didn't understand it. The comment was, the move to Canada wasn't smart, was the comment. She didn't know what it meant. Years later, I talked to Eva. She told me this comment. And as I pieced this together, I said, Eva, do you know what that means? They moved the stand-in from Nicaragua to Canada, and at the if he was in Canada longer than 6 months, they had to pay Canadian taxes. Howard Hughes is not paying taxes to anybody at any time of any amount, and so they had to move the stand-in out of Canada within 6 months. And Eva said, "That makes sense. Now that comment makes sense to me. The move to Canada wasn't smart." But it wasn't until we're able to put all of this stuff together that it worked out. He was bipolar. He was not schizophrenic. He was bipolar. And his personality would change from a very, very gentlemanly, very, very congenial, very charming man to a verbally vicious man. And she just got tired of it. And in June of '72, she says, I'm leaving Panama, and I'm going to Flagstaff, Arizona. I'm going to go live in Flagstaff, Arizona.
She accepts that they're not married, and he's married to somebody else.
No, she thinks she's married. She's married. So yeah, she's married to Nik. She's married to Nik Nicely. She doesn't know she's married to Howard Hughes at this point.
But she read the letter saying, I want to divorce him from another woman.
She's beginning to get glimpses of what's going on. He doesn't tell her officially until later. I'll talk about that. But right now, during this period of time, 71, 72, 73, she's getting little glimpses of the situation, and she figures it out about 73. He tells her 75 of the situation there. So she's left him. She's gone to this is June of 72. She's gone into Arizona. He shows up in Arizona mid-July 72. And she's a little peeved at him. And she says, "What you been doing?" And he said, "I had some business to attend to." And I said, "Eva, do you know what happened in June of 72? She said, "I don't have any idea." Watergate. June 17th, 1972 was Watergate. Hunt and Liddy, who were arrested for Watergate, worked directly for a gentleman named Robert Bennett, who worked directly for Howard Hughes. And the 17-minute lapse, remember in the Nixon tapes, that 17-minute lapse of Evelyn Woods, that, according to H.R. Halterman, was the Howard Hughes connection to Watergate. So Howard Hughes was right in the middle of all of Watergate. It happened as they were separated, which a lot of things, as we discovered, happened. He went and interacted when they were separated. And there'd be times that she would just leave him and didn't want to put up with him. And so they would leave there. So now they're in Arizona. They were in Arizona for about 3 years, and they moved about 3 times in 3 years. The aides were always there. The aides were always there protecting him and doing business in there. He began to talk about his childhood. And his childhood was, I was the only child. My parents died young. My dad was in the oil business. My grandfather owned a ranch near Irving, Texas. His childhood was never, my dad was a baker. I had 2 brothers and sisters, lived in Ohio. That was never the childhood. The childhood was always Howard Hughes' childhood. As I've talked to people who interacted with him, again, they confirmed everything Eva said. That's exactly how he described his childhood, as that Texas childhood. They're living in Florida. They're coming up on the winter of 74, 75, and they want to go to a beach in Navarro Beach in Florida. They're living in Alabama. We're going to go to Navarro Beach in Florida for about 5 months because it was a nice place to live. The aides went with them. The aides were right behind in the apartment right above them. And they were living in there. Eva said, I knew something was coming up because he was looking for something in the mail. So he knew he was expecting something to come in the mail. And she says, one day he brought to me a True magazine. February 1975, a True magazine. He opened it up to a certain page, held it up to his head, and it was a picture of Howard Hughes. And she said, Nick, that is you. And he said, read this. And it was about his aviation life. And she said he'd never let me read it if it wasn't true. And she read it all through. She never saw the magazine again. Never saw it again. When Eva told me this story about 5 times, and I said, okay, I got to find this magazine. I worked 5 years. There's one book that I found that referenced the True magazine article of 1975, and so I said, it's there. So I kept working with it. I finally found the magazine in a library in New Jersey, And they printed it off and sent me a copy. I went back to Eva, I said, Eva, was this the magazine? And she said, that was it. That was the one. And after that, he basically revealed himself to her. I'm not Nik Nicely, I'm Howard Hughes. She talked to him about flying the Spruce Goose. He said, why did you do that? It was so dangerous. It's a dangerous thing to do. He said, I did it because I was told it wouldn't fly, and I was going to prove it would fly. He talked about flying around the world in 1938. He talked about the parades in 1939, meeting President Roosevelt in 1939. He talked about the Senate hearings. He wouldn't talk about the aircraft accident that he had in 1946, where he burned his feet and his hands, because Nik Nicely had his feet and his hands burned. He would never talk about that. He never told her how that happened. Other people who I've talked to confirmed that his hands were burned and that he would never sign anything. So now he's finally revealed to her, what she already knew, that this is Howard Hughes under another identity that we had talked about. Okay, let's see what we got here. The house that they lived in Troy, Alabama, this is it. Believe it or not, this is the house they lived in, 7 miles west of Troy, Alabama. They lived here for about 2 years, and the aides were down the road across the road from them. This is right on Highway 29, and they lived a half mile down the road in another shack, because Eva said the black car was always parked in front of that shack, and Eva would see them come and interact with him. They would come, and Eva would see him out the window interacting with them. One time, she pointed him out to him. Nik and her were in the house, and she pointed him out to him and said, Nik, look at this. And he just laughed and laughed and laughed. But that's how he would do his business. This was before the death in 1976. They were actually living here during the death in 1976 when Howard Hughes, the long-haired, long-fingernail guy, dies. They actually died on an airplane coming into Houston. And of course, it's huge news. Howard Hughes is dead. Howard Hughes is dead. Kind of like Elvis Presley. Elvis Presley died. Well, this was Howard Hughes died in 1976. They bring him in, and they're listening to it on the radio because Nik would never let Eva have a TV. He said, TVs are worthless. There's nothing on them that's good, and we're not going to have one. And so they listened to it on the radio, and Eva's comment to Nik is, the public's going to know that this is not true because they're trying to get him in the ground too fast. Nik's comment is, you really know who your friends are when you fake your death and you see who shows up at the service. At the service was 25 people. 24 of them were family members, most of whom he'd never met before, and the other person there was a CIA agent. Let's go through the CIA connection now. We've already got the CIA of the communications. Remember Vernon Nicely? He was working for the CIA in Panama. This is confirmed to me from his sons. He was working for the CIA in Panama. He was working counter drugs. And his son told me several things which would probably place his dad's life in danger. Whether he's died in 1969, whether he was given another identity and is living somewhere else, we don't know. But he disappeared in 1969 working for the CIA. Howard Hughes was also in 1969 requested by the CIA to go help raise a Soviet submarine that had sunk northwest of Hawaii. And Howard Hughes said, yeah, I'll do it. And he built a boat that went out that would go down and grab the thing, bring it up, until they could take it into shore to see what was on that Soviet sub that was weapons or code books or communications devices, all that stuff. And so the CIA is run all the way through this thing. And the final CIA thing that we know of was he's at Howard Hughes' funeral saying, obviously, get this body in the ground. Get this body in the ground. Because that body, who his cousin William Loomis came into the morgue and looked at the body on the table, and his comments was, this is Howard Hughes? That's what his comments were. Well, they got that body in the ground in less than 48 hours. And prior to that, Nik would go with Eva into Troy, Alabama, and go to lunch, go to the hardware store, whatever they needed to do to interact. He'd go in with her. After that, he wouldn't go anywhere. He could never have afforded to have been found. He never went anywhere. They stayed either in that red house or in the other houses that they were living in, or on the ranch. After they lived in that red house for about 2 years, they moved about 3 other places. And then they ended up on 20 acres of wooded property west of Troy, Alabama, that if you wanted to hide, this would be where you'd go. Yeah, I took Eva back there twice. My wife and I have been back there twice. I've been back there another time. And it's a hard place to find. Even with, Eva lived there 25 years. And as we went back to it, we had a hard time finding the lane to go back into the ranch. But she, as we drove past it 3 times and said, I think that's the lane right there. We went back into lane about 200 yards, and there was their travel trailers. There was their trailers that they had back in there. And she said, okay, this is it. I know this is it. So they lived in this travel trailer, about a 30-foot travel trailer, for 11 years. He always had to be able to leave. And while we were there, Eva said he kept his clothes in barrels. There are these big Rubbermaid barrels. And there are about 5 or 6 of them around the ranch. But you could see them all. I could see them all. And she said, his clothes are in those barrels. And so I went and took the top off the barrels, and sure enough, there was slacks and shirts and things all neatly folded and laundered in the bottom of the barrels. But he had to live in a way that he could escape at any time. So they could bring a car in or a pickup in, throw the barrels in the back, throw him in the front, and he'd be gone. He'd be off. And that's the way they lived for years and years and years, was in there. He began talking more about his childhood tour. He began talking more about a special friend that he had as a child. And in the books, of course, there's one special friend there that he had. In 1987, she said he was very upset. He was very upset, and he told her, my friend died. And as we trace that back, his friend did die in 1987. So he was getting information, and somehow we asked Eva, I said, Eva, did he make contact? She said, yes, he made contact after 76. The aides just disappeared after 76. The aides weren't needed anymore. He didn't have more business to take care of. So the aides were gone after 76. But he was making contact with somebody. I said, Eva, how did he do it? She said, he sent out a postcard, and someone would respond. And I said, did you ever mail him? No. Did he let you ever see him? No. I knew they were going out, but I didn't know where they're going to. I didn't know who they're going to. And shortly after that, there might have been a visit, or there might have been a helicopter making a visit to him and come in and interact in some way, and then they were gone. She said there's times after the stand-in died in 76, and they were living on the ranch, that he'd be gone all day long. He'd just be gone. And she asked him, she said, Nik, where have you been all day? And he said, oh, I fell from a tree and was unconscious. You know, and she didn't buy that at all. Come on, Nik. You come up with something better than that. But there'd be times that he'd just disappear. And through their whole relationship, he would just disappear. He'd just be gone. She didn't know where he was in the action of that. The next picture I'm going to show you, this is a picture we didn't have in the book. My wife Susan, right over here, and I went back to Alabama a year ago in December, and I did about 7 presentations there, all throughout their area. And one lady named Mary Bozeman. Mary Bozeman is in the book, a wonderful lady, interacted with them. They lived across the street from them, actually, in Goshen, Alabama, which is a little town of about 300 people. And they became very, very good friends. Her husband, Paul Bozeman, is 6 foot tall. And I said, Paul, when you talked to Nik, was he taller than you or lower than you? He said he was 6'4". He said he was much taller than I was. Vernon Nicely was 5'11", according to all his military records. He was much taller. He always said his background was from Texas, and he grew up an orphan, and he was really interested in aviation. He said that's what described him. He says he didn't interact much, but we got this picture of Nik, and this is Nik from 1990. I'd never seen this one before, but if you take this picture, that's not good lighting up there. I've got another manual picture of it. You take this picture, compare it to the picture on the front of the book, and you look at the eyes, you got an exact match. You got an exact match of this of Howard Hughes. And then also there's lines around the mouth and things like that that also.
There's face recognition software now. Has any of these pictures been run through that to see if there's a match?
I've tried going through 2 photographic experts, and basically they said there's some semblance here, and they quit talking to me. They just quit talking to me. I was never able, they never responded again, they never talked to me, they never, so.
You ever feel like you were being followed?
I've never felt like I've been followed. People have asked me that a lot.
You do your research, everything else.
Yeah.
Nothing.
There's a guy who I know through the military who's familiar with the CIA, and I told him, I said, what's the CIA going to do with this when it comes out? He says they'll do one of 2 things. They won't do anything because it's 35 years old and they could care less. And the other one is they might say, well, this is obviously not true. And so far they've done nothing. I've gotten nothing off them. So we got this picture of Nik when we went back. When we did go back to Alabama in 2010, there was about 9 people that came to us, and they said we always knew there's mystery associated with them, but we never knew what it was. When we read the book, it all became clear what was going on there. She says it all made sense.
You have his assistants living down the road, in black car. They got to be busy all day. They're living in a town of 300 people. I mean, he's worried about his clothing and putting them in things that have to leave fast. Who's going to know with a town of 300? He's already theoretically dead for a number of years.
Okay.
But
Okay.
his age must have brought up some kind of scratching of the head.
Yeah, the timing thing on this, because I struggled with that for a long time. And what I found was when they're living in the red house with the aides down the road, that was before he died. That was before 76 when he died. And so he was living in there, and that was just west of Troy, Alabama. And so that was kind of there. After he died is when they started moving, and the aides were gone at that point. Yeah, so they weren't there at that point. But they were there doing business. If you read the books, through all these 6 years, I mean, there's businesses bought. He wanted to buy airlines. He was buying hotels. He was buying all kind of things. Wanted to buy all kind of things. And then you got to think, okay, was this long-haired, long fingernail guy that was making all these business decisions? It doesn't make any sense on that. Yes?
Do they feel that when big cases were happening at that time in the mid-70s in New York City, that he had any input in that one at all to anyone? He had 2 or 3 big cases.
Lawsuits?
More than that. And his staff was handling that. I do know because Lance was one of them.
He was,
Yeah,
when Howard Hughes was declared mentally incompetent in 73, he had 40 lawsuits against him. And so he had all kind of lawsuits against him. The interesting thing about it, from my reading and remembering, I don't think he ever lost a lawsuit. I don't think he ever lost one, which tells me his money was helping him out quite a bit in many ways, because he never lost one. And then if you're mentally incompetent, I don't think you can be sued, can you, if you're mentally incompetent? I don't know. He had all kind of help. He was making decisions. I believe he was making decisions, passing that information through his satellite phones. They were writing down his instructions where the stand-in was by another aide there. That's why his handwriting never matched between a will that he had, that they think he had, and his notes. He was a smart dude, and he knew what he was doing, and he did it well.
How was his business set up? Was it set up as a corporation, sole proprietorship? Because if it was a corporation, it really doesn't matter. The business would be sued, not him.
They had all kind of lawsuits. You name a lawsuit, it was against him. Okay. And some, he had all kind of, he had TWA, he had Hughes Tool, he had a company called Summa. There's all kind of business entities in there that just got more confusing and more confusing and more confusing. Then he threw a nonprofit in there too. The Howard Hughes Medical Institute was thrown in there too, which added, was done primarily, I think, to avoid taxes. And I believe he owns 78% of TWA, something like that. In '66, remember when he had that eye change? He had just gotten a payout from TWA, which I think was like $550 million. And that's what he went and bought all of his hotels with in Las Vegas, was that $550 million. Plus he had plenty left over. Eva loved him. She loved him. And she got fed up, actually, she got fed up on the ranch. And so she went into Troy, Alabama and bought a house, which was a nice looking house. I mean, we went back, there's a picture of it in the book. We went back and looked at the house. Nice looking house. She took Nik there and said, Nik, I bought a house. Nik said, I'm not living in that house. The roof's going to cave in. And she would just leave him at times because she couldn't put up with it. So she would go somewhere and sometimes 9 months at a time and just leave him and go live somewhere else and then come back. He'd say, come back, and she'd go back to him. Now his motivation, I think there's several factors there. Number one, he just wanted to hide. He couldn't go anywhere without being recognized. Las Vegas hotels, he'd be recognized. He what?
He went everywhere without being recognized.
Yeah. Now the other aspect of that is something that we've just learned, and I don't know how this fits in, but a gentleman came to us, I was doing a presentation, a gentleman came to us and said he was in Las Vegas working in the casinos in 69, 70 time frame, and he said at that point, everyone in the casino, not everyone, but the common knowledge of the casinos was that Howard Hughes had bought these casinos in conjunction with the government, and that the government could then look at the business dealings of the casinos and who he bought them from the mafia, and therefore indict the mafia. And that's what they were doing, evidently. They're doing some mafia indictments on that. And he thought, the theory was that Howard Hughes took on another identity.
Shows in a magazine, and he basically admits that he's Howard Hughes. At this point, she knows she doesn't have a marriage.
No. That's not her thinking. That's not a woman's thinking.
Thinking, but she doesn't have a marriage at that point.
No, she's not thinking that at all.
Well,
Yeah.
she theoretically got married when he was married to somebody else. You're saying she wasn't thinking that way.
Yeah.
I asked her, she left anything in his will? Did she ever inherit anything?
No.
Of his property?
No. She never got anything.
You know he was married?
He was cremated.
He was cremated.
I have his ashes. The other gentleman believed to be buried is in a cemetery, the stand-in, I believe he buried in a cemetery in Houston.
And nobody's gone in there, not that the argument would be that they removed him after he was buried, but, if it was the CIA.
Yeah, that option is there. Yeah, that option is there.
Yeah, that brings up another question. Why did they leave a body that could be checked out later? Why didn't they cremate the stand-in?
Maybe the body isn't there anymore.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
You need to check it against something.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you would think that if it were a stand-in, you would want to destroy the body.
Yeah. See, that the stand-in body still, supposedly, theoretically available at this point. I talked to Eva, she always told me this birth date thing was wrong. The birth date was wrong. He was born in 1905.
Right.
Vernon Nicely was born in 1921. And so comparing it to Eva, she said the gentleman I was married to was always older than I was. Vernon Nicely would have been younger than she was. But an interesting thing, about 4 months ago, a lady came to us through another woman and said, I knew Nik and Eva in 1981, and I interacted with them because I worked for a drugstore and I was taking prescription drugs out to the elderly. And she said his left hand was burned. He'd never signed anything. He was 6'4" tall. He said the people that he worked with were a guy named Herb, a guy named Bob, a guy named Bill, and a guy named Jack, who were exactly who he worked with. Jack Reel, Bob Mayhew, Bill Gay, and a guy named Herb Wolf. She said, he said he'd been in an aircraft accident, and she didn't believe him. And he told her, I'm Howard Hughes, and she didn't believe him. And then this was before she read the book. She got the book and said, the book explains everything that was going on that I didn't know in 1981, 82.
Okay, another question. These properties that they lived on, did they own them? Did they rent them? What are the tax records? Who paid the taxes on these?
They owned, the only thing they owned a property was this ranch,
Okay.
which was the acreage. And evidently what happened to that was he didn't have any Social Security or any Medicare. Now, people were associated, well, why would you have Social Security or Medicare? I guess if you're not the guy whose identification you're using, but he didn't have them. And so he went into a hospital in Troy, Alabama, and worked up a $17,000 bill. And they were thinking they're going to come take the property from him to pay that bill. So they signed the property over to this Dwayne Henderson, actually, who's in the book. So Dwayne Henderson's the one who has the property. The property's still there. She had civil service retirement coming in. She had Social Security coming in. And he actually was receiving a Air Force disability check that that Vernon Nicely earned. So they had money to live on, and she had saved up some money. But they were not spending a lot of money either. She asked him, what happened to all your money? And he said, it went to my family.
Went to where?
Went to my family, who got it in the courts. He always wore gloves. He had boxes and boxes of gloves, of which they were there. He didn't have it on in here. But he wore gloves, I think, for three reasons. One is the germs. One is fingerprints. He wasn't going to leave fingerprints. And the third one was the damaged hands. And so he always had gloves on that were too big. She said he always had boots on that were too big. And so he was very much of a germaphobe, but he was trying to protect himself from it. Just because he wasn't wearing gloves in this picture doesn't mean he wasn't wearing gloves. He wore gloves everywhere he went. Up until the time he died, he was wearing gloves. Dental records. The only dental records that I could trace back, he went to a dentist in Troy, Alabama in 1981 or 82. Bloomer Dental, I think it was. I've gone back to them and said, do you have dental records back to 1981, 82 on this gentleman? They said, those are long gone. Those dental records are long gone. I wish we could trace them back, but they're not there. I've gone to the FBI and tried to get information out of the FBI, and they have released a bunch of information, but none of it is pertinent in any way to this. And they quit talking to me. They promised me a whole bunch of stuff, and they never said a thing. Eva was afraid of being kidnapped, because Nik told her you could be kidnapped because you know too much. And so she was afraid of being kidnapped. There'd be times when she would go from the ranch there into Troy, and the car would break down, and within minutes, someone would come, and let's say it was a tire. Someone would come, repair the tire, not say a word, and she'd be off. That one time, she said, somebody came, fixed the tire, whatever it was, it went bad, and said, it was a very nice gentleman. He said, are you going home now? And she said, yes, I'm going home now. And that was the only interaction she had. But there were people that were obviously following it. You remember when I said during that 2 month, did I say it? During that 2 month period of time that he was gone, she said, I feel like I'm being followed. He said, you were being followed. That she had her followed because he told her you could be kidnapped, which caused a huge paranoia in Eva. June of 2002, Eva asked me, we met in January 2002, she said, can we go and distribute the ashes? Because he wanted the ashes distributed on the beach there in Florida. And I said yes, and I went back in June of 2002, and we went down to the beach and distributed the ashes. She said, don't distribute all the ashes. And so I kept about a quarter of them in a plastic bag. And I brought them back to her and handed them to her. And when I was cleaning out I never saw them again until I was cleaning out her apartment. When I was cleaning out her apartment, when she moved from independent living in Jacksonville, Florida, into a nursing home, I found the ashes in a pimento jar. And it says Nik's ashes on the top of the pimento jar. And right now they're in a museum on display in Nebraska. She has 3 children, 2 daughters, 1 son. The son is a homeless in Florida somewhere. And the 2 daughters, we tried to find them at her death, and I could never find them at her death. I could never locate them. There had been some kind of estrangement in there, and probably because Nik didn't want to deal with them, I suspect. He didn't want to deal with them, so he got them pushed back. The last interaction was years ago. It seemed to be a very sad situation with a family life. But I think Nik was forcing that because Nik didn't want him around. He didn't want anybody around. If any visitors came out to the ranch, he'd go hide in the woods. A lot of people said, we went to the ranch, we saw Eva. I said, where was Nik? Never saw Nik. Nik was hiding in the woods. The first editor we had of the book was a CIA man. The first editor that the publisher had was a CIA person, and he said, it's exactly what Howard Hughes would have done. It's exactly what the CIA would have done. He says, this is happening all the time. Getting another identity, disappearing, and going off living somewhere else. It's happening all the time. So this is not unusual. As Eva said several times, she said, she got mad at him and said, I'm going to tell people who you are. And he said, you just go right ahead. Nobody's ever going to believe you anyway. And so it comes to that believable factor is what it does after a while. There's no known DNA on Howard Hughes. There's a aircraft museum in Lakeview, Florida, that has artifacts of Howard Hughes' flying career, like a mask and a oxygen mask and a leather mask and coats and things like that. I have been there and I've taped those. So the DNA person that I'm working with has that information, has that stuff. Never been tested. Never been tested because we don't have any late life DNA to test it to. And so we've tried some late life DNA testing, which let us know where.
What do you think Vernon Nicely was? Do you think there was a connection before?
Between
somebody they could use.
Between Vernon Nicely and Howard Hughes?
Yeah.
I don't think there's any connection. I think Vernon Nicely was working with the CIA. He's on a counter-drug mission in Colombia. He got killed.
The CIA gave him.
And the CIA says, oh my goodness, we got a guy here. He's not with his family. He's divorced. He's got an aviation background. A lot of matches there. A lot of matches there.
Yeah, but
Nik Nicely is the name that when he got the Vernon Nicely ID card, he said, I'm going to be called Nik Nicely instead of Vernon Nicely. And so he's the one who went Nik Nicely. There again, that caused more confusion. You just throw more confusion at it. We've been in the military, many of us. Military, what do? You confuse. That's what keeps you alive, is you confuse. And that's what he did. He just caused confusion everywhere he could go. Eva was extremely intelligent. Eva never had any psychological problems. Eva was an extremely intelligent lady. And we were asking her questions up until 2 weeks prior to her death. Eva was with it. Everyone who interacted with Eva loved her. She was a very, very classy lady. All of the aides, he signed a contract prior to the stand-in's death that paid them for the rest of their lives. So they were paid very well to keep their mouth shut. As I was going through her paperwork, when clearing it out, I found a vehicle registration for a vehicle in 1974 in Louisiana. And I thought, they never lived in Louisiana. So I went back to Eva and said, Eva, did you register a vehicle in Louisiana in 1974? And she just laughed and laughed. She says, oh, that was Nik. Yeah, he registered in various states, and he just wanted to cause confusion.
Yeah, but I also think that he was crazy. I think he was very eccentric. Not crazy,
Yeah, he was. Yeah.
But eccentric
Yeah.
to the point where he did things that weren't logical, that he thought were perfectly logical.
Yeah.
Because he wasn't right.
I think definitely.
I
Definitely.
mean, I think we can conclude that this guy is not Vernon, what was the last name?
Nicely.
Nicely. I mean, that's fairly obvious. Whether he's Howard Hughes, that's a separate question.
Yeah. Well, that's up to you to decide. Read the book. Get the book and read it, and you decide. The book is written of everything in there we were able to confirm in one way or other. And it's written of, read the book. If you believe it, fine. If you don't believe it, fine. But it's a wild story. A guy named Jeff Schumacher in Las Vegas. He wrote a book out in 07, 08 time frame. And when I talked to Jeff, Jeff said, I've got something in my book that exactly parallels your book. In 1929, Howard Hughes and a movie star named Billy Dove went and lived in a dirt floor lean-to in a ranch south of Las Vegas, and they worked as farmhands there. They lived in this thing. Billy Dove afterwards said, those 2 weeks of which we lived as farmhands in a dirt floor shack was the happiest time I'd ever seen Howard Hughes. He said that exactly matches where they lived in Camp Verde, Arizona. I didn't go over this, but they lived in Camp Verde, Arizona for almost 2 years, where he was taking care of horses in Camp Verde, Arizona in just a cabin type thing. And he says, that's an exact match. I've tried to go through publishers to find things. I've tried to go directly to authors to find things, and I get nothing. Jeff had a great idea with Richard Hack, and I think I'm going to pursue that path, who wrote a very good book about him, very well documented book about him. But what they don't ever say is what happened in his later life. No one ever, all of the books end up, well, we're not really sure what happened later in life. We can't ever explain it. And when her story explains it. So I think I'm going to try to go back to Richard Hack and get some kind of an inroads in there. But we haven't had good luck, because I've tried to go back and confirm things with some of these other authors, and you just get nothing out of them.
What would you say is his, if it were, let's say, what would you say his motivations were?
He wanted to hide.
But for what reason?
He couldn't be. He did not like interacting with people. He didn't like it. He couldn't have come into a group like this and interacted with you. He wanted to hide. He was a recluse. He wanted to be reclusive. And that was driving him more than anything else. His assistants were 3 Mormon aides. His assistants were his aides that he trusted very, very well. And if he didn't trust you, he wasn't doing business with you, for one thing. And if you couldn't keep a secret, he wasn't doing business with you. And he knew the Mormon aides could keep a secret. But the overriding thing about Howard Hughes is a recluse, as it's always been. I mean, that's the number one word that people, throw that out. Okay, my military career. I was one of the last people drafted in 1972 in the military. Graduated from college one day, got married the next day, and she stuck with me for the last 40 years. So, and through thick and thin. And I went in as an officer and spent 8 years flying F-4s, 6 in Europe. And then we moved 8 times in 8 years, and my wife said, I'm kind of tired of doing moving. So we moved back to Nebraska, and I joined the Air National Guard there, which had our F-4s, reconnaissance F-4s, which are faster and lower than the F-4s are. And then did that part-time, worked as a manufacturing aerospace firm, of which I was the program manager for the second stage of the Peacekeeper missile and another anti-satellite missile. Did that for quite a while, and then decided I wanted to do something different, so I became the commander for Nebraska Air Guard when the Nebraska Guard changed from F-4s to KC-135s. And so we went into KC-135s and sent people all over the world doing refueling missions. And then I was looking to be a general officer and did that for about 5 years, and then ready to retire. And then Stratcom comes and says, can you do this 2-star job? So I got a 2nd star working on some specific projects that Stratcom was looking for at that point in time. So that's kind of my military career, is that. Flying fighters in Europe was phenomenal. It's just amazing. Just a wonderful experience. Spent a lot of time TDY, spent a lot of time in different countries. We traveled a lot between different countries, and so learned a lot about different cultures. Easily going between one country and another in a jet fighter it was great. It was great.